The impact was a blinding explosion of white-hot pain. I felt the rough edge of the decorative brick shatter my cheekbone before I even registered the movement. My own father had just swung it directly into my face. As the blood blurred my vision pooling on the expensive patio stones, I heard a sound that will haunt me forever. My mother was clapping. She laughed a bright bubbly sound and said, "Let us see if your perfect fiancé still wants you with a face like that." They thought they had finally broken me. They had no idea they had just handed a cybersecurity CEO the exact motivation needed to dismantle their entire lives dollar by dollar. My name is Clara. I am 33 years old. For years I survived in the shadow of my sister, the family golden child. I kept my head down and quietly built a tech empire that they knew nothing about. Before I tell you how I turned the worst night of my life into the ultimate reckoning, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to destroy your happiness. You will want to hear exactly how I brought their fake empire crashing down. The nightmare began on a perfectly sunny Saturday afternoon in late September. My fiancé Leo and I were driving up to my parents' sprawling estate in the wealthy suburbs of Connecticut. It was their annual end-of-summer barbecue, an event my parents Richard and Patricia used strictly to show off their manicured lawns and their supposedly perfect family to the neighbors. I had not been home in months. My relationship with my family was strained at best. But Leo and I had gotten engaged 2 weeks prior, and he being the warm, family-oriented man that he is convinced me that we needed to share the news in person. Leo is 34 years old, a deeply successful entrepreneur who treats everyone with genuine respect. He knew my family could be difficult, but he believed that good news like an engagement might soften them. I knew better, but I loved him enough to try. As we pulled into the long circular driveway, my stomach tightened into familiar knots. The house loomed ahead, a massive stone structure that felt more like a fortress than a home. We walked into the backyard hand in hand. The patio was crowded with guests holding crystal glasses of wine. My mother Patricia spotted us first. She was holding court near the outdoor bar wearing a designer sundress. Instead of a warm greeting, her eyes immediately darted to my outfit, silently calculating its worth before moving to Leo. Her fake smile plastered onto her face as she stepped forward. She did not hug me. She never did. She extended a hand to Leo, entirely ignoring my presence. My sister Audrey was lounging on a patio sofa a few feet away. At 30 years old, Audrey was the undisputed center of my parents' universe. She was conventionally gorgeous, perpetually draped in whatever luxury brands my parents could afford to buy her. Audrey had always viewed life as a competition, one where the rules were rigged entirely in her favor. Standing slightly behind Audrey was her husband DeAndre. He is a brilliant, hard-working African-American man, but my parents constantly belittled him, making his life miserable. DeAndre gave me a small, sympathetic nod as we approached. I took a deep breath, looking at my parents and my sister. Leo squeezed my hand, a silent promise of support. "We have some exciting news," I announced, lifting my left hand so the afternoon sun caught the diamond ring on my finger. "Leo and I are getting married." Silence rippled across our immediate circle. I watched the fake smile melt right off my mother's face. She did not offer congratulations. She did not gasp in joy. She stared at the ring, her eyes narrowing, as she mentally appraised the flawless stone. A ring like that did not fit the narrative they had assigned to me. In their minds, I was the plain, boring daughter who worked in some invisible computer job destined to settle for mediocrity. Audrey stood up so fast she nearly spilled her drink. Her eyes locked onto the diamond, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage crossing her features. For a moment, the mask slipped entirely. She looked at her own hands, devoid of such luxury, and then glared at me with a hatred so intense it made my blood run cold. She marched over to us, completely ignoring the basic rules of social decency. "Are you kidding me?" Audrey sneered, looking Leo up and down. "A guy like you is settling for Clara. She is so plain. She is practically invisible. You have got to be joking." My father, Richard, who had been grilling nearby, walked over upon hearing the commotion. Instead of reprimanding Audrey for her blatant cruelty, he chuckled. "Now, Audrey, do not be rude," he said, though his tone was entirely approving. "Your sister finally found someone willing to put up with her boring personality. We should be celebrating that a guy with a nice watch is willing to take her off our hands." The casual humiliation was standard for my family, but Leo had never witnessed it firsthand. I felt his posture shift. His grip on my hand tightened not in fear, but in protective anger. He looked my father dead in the eye, his voice calm, steady, and utterly lethal. "I am not putting up with anything," Richard Leo said, stripping away any pretense of polite respect. "Clara is brilliant, beautiful, and the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. I am lucky she said yes. And frankly, considering the company she comes from, I am amazed she turned out so incredibly well." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one ever spoke to my father like that. No one dared challenge the narrative he and my mother had constructed. My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if physically wounded. Audrey turned a violent shade of red. She stepped right into Leo's personal space, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "She is a loser," Audrey yelled, causing the rest of the party guests to freeze and turn toward us. "She is ugly, and she is boring. You are wealthy. You are handsome. You belong with someone who actually understands your lifestyle. Someone like me. Why are you choosing this pathetic excuse for a woman over someone who actually belongs in your world?" I stood there paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words. She was openly demanding that my fiancé leave me for her right in the middle of our parents' backyard. I waited for my mother to intervene to tell Audrey she had gone too far. Instead, Patricia stood there nodding, her eyes darting between Leo and Audrey, silently agreeing with every poisonous word. Leo did not flinch. He looked at Audrey with an expression of pure disgust. "The only pathetic thing here is a grown woman begging for attention from a man who is marrying her sister Leo," said his voice ringing clearly across the patio. "You could not offer me a single thing I want. Clara is 10 times the woman you will ever be. We are leaving." He turned to guide me away, but we never made it to the driveway. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind us. My father, his face contorted with absolute rage over his favorite daughter being humiliated, charged forward. He grabbed the heavy, jagged brick that had fallen loose from the edge of the stone fire pit. He did not aim for Leo. He aimed for the source of his family's lost control. He aimed for me. The impact knocked me backwards. Blood instantly poured down my face, blinding my right eye. I heard my mother clap. She actually clapped her hands together and laughed out loud. "Let us see if he still loves you with a smashed face," Patricia mocked. Before my father could raise his arm to strike me again, a heavy body slammed into him. It was DeAndre. My brother-in-law tackled my father to the ground, placing his own body between the violent man and my bleeding face. "Get your hands off her," DeAndre shouted, restraining my father. My parents immediately began screaming vile racist insults at DeAndre, demanding he let go of the homeowner. Through my blurred vision, I saw Leo pulling his phone out, his hands shaking with fury as he dialed 911. The perfect family barbecue had just become a crime scene. Sirens shattered the quiet suburban afternoon, drowning out the racist slurs my mother was screaming at DeAndre. Through my good eye, the world had become a distorted blur of red and green. DeAndre kept his knee planted firmly between my father's shoulder blades, holding Richard down against the manicured grass. My father thrashed and cursed, his expensive golf shirt smeared with dirt, completely unhinged by the fact that a man he despised had overpowered him. Leo knelt beside me on the patio stones, his hands pressing a wad of cloth against my face. His crisp dress shirt was soaked in my blood, but his voice remained incredibly steady as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher. The transition to the hospital was a chaotic montage of flashing lights and sharp medical commands. The emergency room doors slammed open, fluorescent lights passed overhead in a blinding rhythm. Leo refused to leave my side, When a nurse tried to usher him to the waiting area, he simply planted his feet and stated he was my fiancé and he was staying right here. His composure, which had so thoroughly threatened my sister earlier, now became my absolute lifeline. The reality of my physical trauma set in as the trauma surgeon stepped up to the table. We need extreme macro lens precision to capture this nightmare. The harsh silver curve of the surgical needle catching the sterile overhead lights. The stark white medical gauze instantly blooming into a deep, heavy crimson the moment it touched my skin. My own knuckles turning stark white as I gripped the metal bed rails, my jaw locked tightly against the searing pain. The doctor confirmed it coldly. A fractured cheekbone and 15 stitches required to close the jagged tear across my cheek. As the local anesthetic burned into my skin, the adrenaline in my system began to crash, dragging me into a dizzying sequence of flashbacks. The pain medication made my mind rewind to the exact moments before the violence. My memory painted an intense arc shot circling the stone fire pit. I could see the shifting predatory dynamics as clear as day. Audrey and Patricia had expertly cornered Leo and me against the edge of the patio, trying to execute their typical psychological warfare. Audrey had casually twirled her artisanal cocktail, leaning dangerously close to Leo. She tried to humiliate me by bringing up completely fabricated stories of my supposed failures. She laughed while telling Leo about the time I supposedly flunked out of a basic data entry course and had to beg our parents for rent money. It was a complete fiction. I had been quietly building my cybersecurity firm while living on instant noodles, refusing to ask them for a single dime. But Audrey spun the lie with the practiced ease of a golden child who had never been told no. Patricia had stood right beside her, subtly encouraging the character assassination. My mother placed a manicured hand on Leo's arm, attempting to position Audrey as the superior catch. She told Leo that Audrey had refined, expensive tastes completely suited for a man of his obvious caliber. She even suggested Audrey could act as his personal tour guide on his next European business trip, casually dismissing my presence entirely. It was the same tactic they had used for decades, starving me of basic affection so Audrey could shine in the spotlight. They operated on the delusion that I was worthless, entirely unaware that I could buy their entire estate with a fraction of my yearly revenue. The sharp sting of the surgical needle pulling thread through my flesh snapped me back to the cold reality of the emergency room. Leo was holding my uninjured left hand. His thumb traced soothing circles over my knuckles. "You are doing great, Clara," he whispered, his eyes dark with a suppressed fury that he was keeping tightly leashed for my sake. "He is going to pay for this. I promise you Richard is going to pay." Before I could respond, the heavy double doors of the trauma bay swung open. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, their faces tight with official concern, but they were not alone. Right behind them, flanked by a hospital administrator, were Richard and Patricia. I felt my heart rate spike on the monitor beside my bed. My father had somehow posted bail or avoided immediate arrest at the scene, leveraging his status in this wealthy Connecticut suburb to follow me to the hospital. Patricia immediately launched into a masterful, Oscar-worthy performance of a distressed, grieving mother. She rushed past the officers, her hands covering her mouth, producing fake, dry sobs. "Oh, my poor baby," Patricia cried out dramatically, reaching for my bed before Leo swiftly stepped in to block her path. "Officer, you have to understand, she is a troubled girl. She had entirely too much to drink this afternoon. We tried to take her glass away, but she became combative." I stared at her through my one unswollen eye. The audacity was breathtaking. Richard nodded solemnly, playing the role of the exhausted stoic patriarch. "It was a tragic accident, officers," he lied, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. She stumbled over the patio furniture and fell face first into the decorative stones around the fire pit. I tried to catch her, but I was not fast enough. Then her fiancé and that unstable brother-in-law of ours panicked and attacked me. They are just confused and lashing out. The gaslighting was executed with terrifying precision. They were using their wealth, their pristine suburban reputation, and their country club confidence to manipulate the police right in front of me. They wanted to write off a brutal assault as a clumsy, drunken stumble. One of the officers actually lowered his notepad, looking at Leo with a hint of suspicion, clearly swayed by Richard's expensive watch and authoritative tone. They thought they had won. They thought they could silence me just like they always had, burying the truth under a mountain of lies and fake concern. But they did not know about the silent witness parked right in their own driveway. They had no idea what was coming next. The heavy emergency room doors slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss. DeAndre walked into the trauma bay, his presence instantly altering the atmosphere. He stood tall and unyielding, a stark contrast to my parents, who immediately bristled at the sight of him. My father Richard puffed out his chest, his face twisting with that familiar toxic arrogance. He pointed a finger at DeAndre and demanded that the officers remove him, labeling him a violent, unstable man who had no business being in a private family medical space. Patricia chimed in right on cue, clutching her pearl necklace and dramatically claiming she felt unsafe with DeAndre in the room. DeAndre did not raise his voice. He did not react to the thinly veiled racist undertones my parents were feeding the police. He simply walked past them, his focus entirely on the lead officer. He held a sleek, high-definition tablet in his hands. He tapped the screen once and held it out to the officers. "I think you need to see exactly what kind of domestic accident happened today," DeAndre said, his voice carrying the calm, lethal precision of a man who held all the cards. "My car has a built-in security camera system. I parked my Tesla perfectly angled toward the patio. It recorded the entire incident in stunning 4K resolution." The lead officer took the tablet. Leo stepped closer to my bed, his hand gripping mine as the glowing screen illuminated the harsh reality of my family. Even from my hospital bed, I could hear the crisp, clear audio playing from the device. The video served as the ultimate, undeniable climax of the physical altercation. The tight, claustrophobic framing of the dashcam captured the sheer unpredictability and horror of the assault with absolute clarity. On the screen, Audrey was visible, stepping aggressively into Leo's personal space. Her voice echoed from the tablet speakers, boldly demanding that Leo leave me for her. She claimed I was too ugly, too plain, and completely boring for his lifestyle. She stood there dripping in entitlement, insisting she was the superior choice. Then the video showed Leo coldly and surgically dismantling Audrey's delusions, stripping away her ego with absolute disgust. The footage then shifted to my father. The camera captured the exact moment Richard lost his mind. Furious that his favorite daughter was being insulted and rejected, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unrestrained violence. The video showed him lunging toward the fire pit, grabbing a heavy decorative brick with both hands. There was no hesitation. There was no clumsy stumble. It was a calculated, brutal strike. The camera recorded him smashing the brick directly into my face. The sickening sound of the impact echoed in the quiet emergency room, causing one of the nurses to gasp in horror. But the video did not stop there. The high-definition lens captured Patricia standing mere feet away. It showed her clapping her hands together, throwing her head back and laughing as I collapsed onto the patio stones. It captured the sheer malice in her voice as she mocked me. Then the footage showed DeAndre charging into the frame. He tackled Richard to the ground, using his own body to shield me from further strikes. While DeAndre pinned my father down, the audio clearly captured Richard screaming vile, racist insults at DeAndre, calling him every derogatory name imaginable. The video ended. The silence in the emergency room was deafening. The lead officer handed the tablet back to DeAndre. His expression had hardened into solid stone. He turned slowly to look at my father. The wealthy, polished facade my parents had relied on for decades had just been utterly obliterated by a silent digital witness. Richard realized he was trapped. He took a step back, holding his hands up defensively. He tried to use his status, desperately backpedaling and stammering about how the footage was out of context, how he was simply trying to protect his other daughter, and how it was just a momentary lapse in judgment. He actually tried to argue that his actions were a reasonable response to an escalating family dispute over a profound misunderstanding. He claimed he only meant to throw the brick near me to scare Leo away. The officer was not having any of it. "Richard, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." My father's eyes widened in sheer panic as the heavy metal handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists. He protested loudly, demanding to call his high-priced lawyers, shouting that he knew the police chief and could have these officers fired before their shift ended. His arrogant threats meant absolutely nothing as they forcibly marched him toward the emergency room doors, stripping away his dignity in front of the entire hospital staff. Seeing her husband in handcuffs completely shattered Patricia's fake performance. She dropped the distressed mother act instantly, her face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. She marched right up to the edge of my hospital bed, completely ignoring the remaining police officer who stood just a few steps away. "You are going to drop these charges right now," Patricia hissed at me, pointing a trembling finger at my bandaged face. "You are going to tell them it was a terrible mistake. If you let them lock your father up, I will personally destroy your life. I will take everything you have. You will end up on the street with absolutely nothing, begging us for forgiveness." Leo stepped firmly between Patricia and my bed, his physical presence acting as an impenetrable wall. "You will not speak to her again," Leo warned her, his tone dropping to a dangerous, unwavering register. "Get out of this room before I have you arrested for witness intimidation." The remaining officer quickly grabbed Patricia by the arm, instructing her to leave the premises immediately or face severe criminal charges herself. She struggled against the officer's grip, screaming angry curses at me as she was dragged down the hospital corridor. Her shrill voice faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie, ringing silence in the trauma bay. DeAndre stepped forward and stood next to Leo. We locked eyes, forming an immediate, unspoken alliance. My family thought they had broken me with violence and intimidation. They thought I was a vulnerable, pathetic target who would simply accept their abuse and bow to their ridiculous demands. They had no idea that their brick had only shattered my last remaining shred of mercy. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the cold ceiling tiles, my resolve hardened into solid steel. I was going to uncover every single lie they had ever told, and I was going to use my hidden resources to bury their entire fake empire permanently. Their absolute destruction was only just beginning today. The adrenaline that had kept me alert during my parents' arrest suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sweeping darkness. My body began to violently shake against the thin hospital mattress. The monitors beside my bed started blaring a rapid, high-pitched alarm. The temporary bandages the nurses had applied earlier were already soaked through, failing to contain the massive damage my father had inflicted. A new team of trauma specialists rushed into the bay, their voices a blur of urgent medical commands. They needed to move me to a sterile surgical suite immediately to properly set the fractured cheekbone and close the deep, jagged laceration across my face. The world tilted sideways as my bed was unlocked and rapidly wheeled down the bright, sterile corridors. Through my one uninjured eye, I saw Leo walking right beside the stretcher. His hand never left mine. When a scrub nurse attempted to block him at the surgical suite doors, telling him family members had to wait outside, Leo did not even blink. He planted his feet firmly on the polished linoleum floor. "I am her fiancé, and I am not leaving her side," he stated, his voice radiating a quiet, dangerous authority that left absolutely no room for debate. The nurse stepped back, allowing him to enter the room. The harsh, blinding surgical lights snapped on above me. In my mind's eye, the entire agonizing ordeal is etched in extreme macro-lens precision, capturing the visceral horror of the moment. The focus zeroes in tightly on the bloody gauze being peeled away from my ruined skin, the crimson stains soaking deep into the woven white fibers. The perspective shifts to the sharp, glinting curve of the surgical needle as the doctor prepares to stitch my torn flesh back together. It pans down to capture my knuckles, turning a stark, translucent white, as my fists clench the cold metal bed rails in absolute agony. As the local anesthetic burned its way deep into my cheek, the heavy painkillers they pushed through my IV began to take hold. The bright room started to warp and dissolve. I found myself fading in and out of consciousness, caught in a terrifying, hazy space between intense physical trauma and deeply buried memories. The rhythmic pull of the surgical needle dragging thread through my skin became a metronome pulling me backward into the darkest corners of my childhood. The physical pain morphed seamlessly into decades of psychological starvation. A short, sharp flashback hit me with brutal clarity. I was 12 years old, standing in our lavish Connecticut kitchen. I was holding a heavy glass trophy I had just won at a regional coding competition. I had spent months building a complex algorithm, hoping the achievement would finally make my father look at me with pride. Richard walked into the kitchen buttoning his expensive suit jacket. I held up the trophy, my heart pounding with eager anticipation. He did not even break his stride. He physically pushed me aside, muttering that I was blocking the hallway. Audrey had a minor ballet recital that evening, and Patricia was already rushing around fixing Audrey's hair and adjusting her designer dress. Not now, Clara, my mother had snapped, not even glancing at my hard-earned award. Audrey needs our complete focus today. Put that useless piece of glass away before someone trips over it. The memory faded back into the blinding light of the surgical suite. I felt the sharp tug of the thread. 1 stitch, 2 stitches, 3 stitches. The surgeon worked with mechanical precision, but the pressure against my fractured cheekbone sent shockwaves of nausea through my stomach. Leo's warm hand gripped mine tighter, anchoring me to the present reality. "You are safe, Clara," he whispered near my ear. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." But the strong painkillers dragged me right back under the surface. Another memory struck sharper and colder than the last. I was 16. It was Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room table was loaded with expensive catered food. Patricia had intentionally seated me at the far end of the long table near the swinging kitchen door, entirely separated from the main conversation. Audrey was seated right between our parents, holding court, laughing loudly, and soaking up every ounce of their adoration. Whenever I tried to speak to join the family dynamic, Patricia would loudly interrupt me to compliment Audrey's outfit or Audrey's latest frivolous purchase. They systematically starved me of basic human connection. They deliberately made me feel invisible, a ghost haunting my own home, just to ensure that the golden child absorbed absolutely all the light and oxygen in the room. They conditioned me to believe that I was fundamentally unlovable, that any space I occupied was a burden to them. 4 stitches, 5 stitches, 6 stitches. I groaned, my body tensing against the rigid hospital bed. The doctor's voice drifted through the medical haze, confirming the severe damage. "The cheekbone is fractured clean through the orbital floor," the surgeon explained to Leo. "It will take significant time to heal. She is lucky the impact did not permanently destroy her vision." Lucky. The word echoed in my mind as another flashback consumed me. I was 19, packing my bags for college. I had secured a full academic scholarship, relieving my parents of any financial burden regarding my education. Meanwhile, Richard had just written a massive check to cover Audrey's credit card debt after she maxed it out on designer bags and luxury vacations. I stood in the doorway of my father's study, asking if he could help me carry my heavy boxes to my beat-up used car. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You are an adult now, Clara," he had said coldly. "Figure it out yourself. We are busy dealing with your sister's needs." I carried every single heavy box down 2 flights of stairs alone, my hands blistering, crying silently in the dark. 7 stitches, 8 stitches, 9 stitches. The physical pain of the needle piercing my face was nothing compared to the realization that my parents had spent my entire life preparing to destroy me. They had groomed Audrey to be a vicious, entitled monster, and they had groomed me to be their silent, compliant punching bag. They thought I would always just take the abuse. They thought I would never fight back. 10 stitches, 11 stitches, 12 stitches. My breathing hitched as the surgeon worked near the most sensitive nerve endings around my eye. Leo leaned over me. I felt his lips press gently against my forehead, right above the sterile surgical drape. His steadfast presence was a stark contrast to the emotional wasteland of my upbringing. He was the first person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth protecting. He was the first person who refused to let my toxic family treat me like garbage. 13 stitches, 14 stitches, 15 stitches. "We are done here," the surgeon finally announced, stepping back from the operating table and pulling off his bloody latex gloves. "The fracture is fully stabilized, but the swelling will get substantially worse before it gets better. She needs absolute rest." The blinding surgical lights were clicked off, plunging the room into a softer, more merciful dimness. The intense, visceral reality of the trauma began to subside, leaving me hollowed out and completely exhausted. As the medical team wheeled me out of the surgical suite and into a quiet, private recovery room, I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Leo. He walked beside me, his jaw set tight, his blood-stained shirt serving as a grim testament to the horrific violence we had just survived. The agonizing flashbacks finally stopped. The painful memories of being the neglected, invisible child retreated back into the dark recesses of my mind. I was no longer that helpless little girl begging for a single crumb of validation from people who hated me. I was a survivor. As the heavy painkillers pulled me into a deep, dreamless sleep, the master blueprint for my family's financial and legal annihilation began to solidify in my mind. The heavy hospital door clicked shut, sealing me inside the quiet recovery room. Outside that door, a completely different reality was being manufactured. We need a split narrative perspective here, cutting sharply between the sterile, brightly lit hospital corridor and the shadowed, silent recovery room to highlight the grotesque contrast. In the hallway, Richard and Patricia stood under the fluorescent lights, looking absolutely flawless. My father had somehow managed to smooth the dirt off his expensive golf shirt. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, projecting the aura of a concerned, upstanding community pillar. Beside him, Patricia dabbed at her dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue. Not a single hair on her head was out of place. They were performing for 2 local police officers who had arrived to take the official statement. Inside the room, the reality was brutally different. I lay completely immobilized on the stiff hospital bed. The left side of my face was swallowed by thick white medical tape and heavy gauze. A dark, ugly purple bruise was already creeping down my jawline, swelling my eyes shut. The metallic taste of blood still lingered on my tongue. I was hooked to an IV, fragile and broken. Back in the hallway, my father was masterfully manipulating the authorities. Richard leaned in close to the lead officer, lowering his voice into a tone of quiet, masculine camaraderie. He casually mentioned his annual donations to the local police benevolent association. He made sure to drop the name of the police chief, phrasing it as if they were old friends who frequently played golf together. The officer, a young man visibly intimidated by my father's immense wealth and status, nodded respectfully. "It is just a tragedy." Officer Richard lied smoothly, shaking his head with fake sorrow. "My daughter Clara has always struggled with her balance when she drinks. We tried to stop her from having that 4th cocktail by the fire pit, but she simply would not listen. She tripped over the patio stones and fell face first right into the decorative bricks. It was horrifying to watch, too." Patricia stepped right on cue, placing a trembling hand on the second officer's arm. "She is a very troubled girl," Patricia whispered, her voice dripping with artificial maternal distress. "She has a history of these dramatic, unstable episodes. We have tried for years to get her the psychological help she desperately needs, but she refuses. And her fiancé, along with our other son-in-law, they just overreacted." Inside the room, Leo paced at the foot of my bed. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. He kept checking his phone, waiting for DeAndre to arrive. Leo knew my parents were out there spinning their web of lies. He knew they were using their country club privilege to paint me as a drunken, hysterical woman who brought this upon herself. In the corridor, Richard took the manipulation a step further. He decided to throw Leo and DeAndre completely under the bus. Richard warned the officers that Leo was an aggressive, controlling man who wanted to isolate me from my loving family. Then, leaning into his deep-seated prejudice, Richard described DeAndre as unpredictable and hostile. He told the police that DeAndre had violently tackled him to the ground for absolutely no reason, deliberately painting the brilliant, hardworking African-American man as a physical threat to a wealthy homeowner. Richard demanded that the police handle Leo and DeAndre, carefully framing them as the true aggressors of the afternoon. The officers absorbed every single poisoned word, swayed entirely by the expensive clothes, the calm demeanor, and the strategic name dropping. The police bought the story hook, line, and sinker. They viewed Richard and Patricia not as perpetrators of a brutal assault, but as wealthy, respectable victims of a chaotic family dispute. The heavy wooden door to my recovery room swung open. The two police officers walked in, their faces completely devoid of empathy. They did not look at me with the compassion reserved for a victim of a violent crime. They looked at me with skepticism. Richard and Patricia lingered right outside the glass window of the door, watching the scene unfold with smug, victorious expressions on their faces. They wanted to witness my final defeat. "Mom, we need to ask you a few questions about your fall," the lead officer said, pulling out a small notepad. His choice of words was deliberate and chilling. He had already classified the brutal brick attack as a simple fall before he even heard my side of the story. "It was not a fall," Leo interrupted instantly, stepping directly between the officers and my bed. Her father picked up a brick and smashed it into her face. "It was an unprovoked, targeted assault. You need to arrest Richard immediately." The second officer crossed his arms, looking Leo up and down with clear annoyance. "Sir, we have multiple eyewitness accounts from the homeowners stating that your fiancé was heavily intoxicated and tripped. We also have reports that you and another individual became physically combative with the property owner. We need you to step back and let us do our job." I forced my good eye open, pushing through the heavy fog of the pain medication. "I am completely sober," I said, my voice hoarse and raspy. "I did not have a single drop of alcohol today." My father hit me. He tried to destroy my face because my fiancé rejected my sister. The lead officer sighed, clicking his pen closed. He looked at my battered face, but his eyes held absolutely no belief. He had already made up his mind out in that pristine hallway. "Look, Miss Family barbecues get out of hand. People drink too much, emotions run high, and accidents happen. Given the conflicting statements and the lack of any neutral third-party witnesses, we cannot prove this was anything more than a clumsy domestic accident." Leo stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "Are you blind?" Leo demanded, his voice rising in anger. "Look at her face. A person does not get 15 stitches and a shattered orbital floor from tripping over a stone. This is a cover-up, and you are letting a wealthy man buy his way out of a felony assault charge." The officer squared his shoulders, his hand resting casually near his duty belt in a subtle show of authority. "Sir, calm down before we remove you from the premises. Based on what we have gathered, we are classifying this as a domestic accident. We will file a standard incident report, but unless you can produce concrete proof that this was a deliberate attack, this case is going to be closed today." Outside the glass window, I saw Patricia smile. It was a small, wicked upward curve of her lips. She leaned her head against Richard's shoulder, acting the part of the relieved mother, while her eyes burned with triumphant malice. They had done it. They had successfully weaponized their status to erase my trauma. They had manipulated the law to protect themselves, leaving me trapped in a broken body with zero legal recourse. The officers turned to leave the room, completely satisfied with their fabricated version of events. My parents thought the game was over. They thought they had secured their victory and silenced me forever. I reached out with my uninjured hand and grabbed Leo's wrist tightly. I needed him to stay calm. I needed him to stand down, because arguing with corrupted, biased police officers would only end with Leo being arrested for disorderly conduct. I squeezed his arm, sending a silent message that we had to play the long game. Leo took a deep, ragged breath and forced himself to step back, his eyes locked on my father through the glass. The officers walked out, joining my parents in the hallway to finalize their completely fabricated police report. Lying in the hospital bed, I did not shed a single tear. The injustice of the moment did not break me. It only fueled the cold, calculating fire burning deep within my chest. The heavy hospital door had barely clicked shut when it was violently shoved open again. The sudden noise made the two police officers pause mid-stride in the hallway. Richard and Patricia turned around, their smug expressions faltering as DeAndre strode through the doorway. My brother-in-law did not look like the erratic, violent man my parents had just spent 20 minutes describing to the authorities. He looked like a man who held a loaded weapon and knew exactly how to use it. DeAndre walked straight past my parents, completely ignoring Richard's immediate protests. In his hands, he held a sleek, high-definition tablet. His posture was rigid, his jaw set with a quiet, lethal determination. He stepped right up to the lead officer, deliberately blocking the exit. "Officers," DeAndre said, his voice calm and incredibly steady, cutting through the tense air of the hospital corridor. "I understand you are about to file a report classifying my sister-in-law's injuries as a domestic accident. I highly suggest you hold off on signing that paperwork." Richard instantly panicked. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson. He lunged forward, trying to physically position himself between DeAndre and the police. "Officers, I want this man removed immediately." Richard barked, his voice dripping with entitled outrage. "He is trespassing. He attacked me on my own property today, and now he is harassing my family in a private medical facility. Arrest him." Patricia grabbed the second officer's sleeve, resuming her frantic, tearful performance. "Please, he is dangerous. He is out of control. You have to get him away from us." The lead officer sighed, visibly irritated by the interruption. He placed a hand on his duty belt and looked at DeAndre with a stern, dismissive glare. "Sir, the property owners have already given their official statements. The victim is heavily intoxicated. We have determined that this was a fall. If you do not step back and leave the premises right now, I will detain you for obstruction." DeAndre did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or take the bait. He simply held up the tablet, angling the large, glowing screen, so both officers were forced to look directly at it. "I drive a Tesla," DeAndre stated, keeping his eyes locked on the lead officer. "It has a built-in security system called Sentry Mode, which utilizes multiple high-definition cameras that record continuously. I parked my car at the top of the circular driveway this afternoon. The front camera was angled perfectly toward the stone patio and the fire pit. It recorded the entire incident in stunning 4K resolution, complete with crystal-clear audio. I think you need to see exactly what kind of domestic accident happened today." Before the officers could object, DeAndre tapped the screen. The video began to play. From my hospital bed, I could clearly hear the audio echoing off the sterile walls. The visual cues on that tablet screen shifted the entire power dynamic of the room in a matter of seconds. The raw footage was undeniable. It started with a wide shot of the patio, the sun shining brightly over the manicured lawn. Then the audio picked up the argument. Audrey's shrill, entitled voice cut through the hospital silence, boldly demanding that Leo leave me for her. The officers watched, their expressions hardening, as my sister claimed I was too plain and boring, aggressively pushing herself into Leo's personal space. The camera captured Leo coldly and surgically dismantling Audrey's delusions, rejecting her with absolute disgust. And then the focal point of the video shifted to my father. The high-definition screen spared absolutely no detail. It captured the exact moment Richard lost his mind. Furious that his favorite daughter was being insulted and rejected, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unrestrained violence. The officers watched him lunge toward the fire pit. They saw him grab the heavy decorative brick with both hands. There was no hesitation on the screen. There was no clumsy stumble from me, no drunken fall. It was a calculated, brutal, targeted strike. The camera recorded him smashing the brick directly into my face. The sickening sound of the impact echoed from the tablet speakers, causing the second officer to physically recoil. But the footage did not stop there. The lens captured Patricia standing mere feet away. It showed her clapping her hands together, throwing her head back and laughing as I collapsed onto the patio stones. It captured the sheer malice in her voice as she mocked me while I bled on her pristine patio. Finally, the video showed DeAndre charging into the frame, tackling Richard to the ground, using his own body to shield me from further strikes, while Richard screamed vile, racist insults at him. The video ended freezing on the final frame of my father holding the bloody brick. The silence that blanketed the hospital corridor was absolute and suffocating. The entire fabricated narrative my parents had just spent an hour building vanished into thin air. The lead officer stared at the tablet, his jaw locked tight. The deference and respect he had shown my father moments earlier completely evaporated, replaced by the rigid, unyielding posture of a cop looking at a violent criminal. DeAndre handed the tablet directly to the lead officer. "I will be emailing you the raw digital file for evidence," DeAndre said quietly. "Would you still like to classify this as a clumsy fall, officer?" Richard realized he was trapped. The wealthy, polished facade he had relied on for decades had just been utterly obliterated by a silent digital witness. He took a step back, holding his hands up defensively. He tried to use his status again, desperately, backpedaling and stammering. He claimed the footage was out of context. He argued that he was simply trying to protect his other daughter from a profound misunderstanding. He actually tried to tell the police that he only meant to throw the brick near me to scare Leo away. The lead officer was not having any of it. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt with a sharp, metallic snap. "Richard, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his voice echoing with absolute terrifying authority. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." My father's eyes widened in sheer panic. The heavy metal handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists, binding his hands behind his back. He protested loudly, demanding to call his high-priced lawyers, shouting that he knew the police chief and could have these officers fired before their shift ended. His arrogant threats meant absolutely nothing. The officers forcibly marched him down the hospital corridor, stripping away his dignity in front of the entire medical staff. Seeing her husband in handcuffs completely shattered Patricia's fake performance. She dropped the distressed mother act instantly, her face contorted into a mask of pure vicious hatred, realizing that her perfect suburban life was slipping through her fingers. Patricia lunged toward the glass window of my recovery room, her hands slamming flat against the clear pane. She screamed something muffled by the heavy doors, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate fury. The second police officer quickly intercepted her, firmly pulling her away from the glass. He issued a sharp warning that if she did not step back and calm down immediately, she would be joining her husband in the back of a squad car for obstructing justice and accessory to assault. Patricia froze, the reality of the handcuffs and the flashing red and blue lights outside finally penetrating her delusion. She watched helplessly as the officers hauled Richard out of the emergency room, his arrogant posture completely shattered, replaced by the stumbling walk of a man who had just lost everything. DeAndre gave Leo a curt, respectful nod before turning to leave the hospital. He had to get back to his children before Audrey could spin her own twisted version of the afternoon's events. Leo stayed exactly where he was, standing guard at the foot of my bed, like an impenetrable shield. Once the hallway was finally clear of my toxic family, the hospital staff moved me to a secure private recovery wing on an upper floor, registering me under a confidential alias to ensure Patricia could not simply walk back in and continue her harassment. The private room was incredibly quiet, the only sound being the steady rhythmic hum of the heart monitor. The intense, chaotic energy of the afternoon began to settle into a cold, heavy silence. I lay back against the pillows, the throbbing pain in my cheekbone radiating through my entire skull. Leo sat in a chair drawn flush against the mattress, his hand resting gently over mine, refusing to let go. Then my cell phone began to vibrate on the bedside table. It buzzed once, then again, then a continuous, relentless stream of notifications. The visual direction for this scene requires absolute static framing. The camera must remain perfectly still, locked onto my battered face as I reach for the phone with a trembling hand. The harsh hospital lighting casts deep shadows over the heavy medical gauze and the angry, spreading purple bruise swallowing my right eye. There is no movement in the room, forcing the audience to focus entirely on the shifting emotions playing across my features. I tapped the screen and opened my voicemail inbox. Patricia had left 7 messages in the span of 20 minutes. I pressed play on the first one, the audio filling the quiet room. Her tone in the first voicemail was entirely performative, utilizing that high, breathy pitch she always used when she wanted to play the victim. Clara, you have to call the police station right now. Patricia begged, her voice shaking with fake tears. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. He is your father. You are destroying our family over a silly argument. Please, sweetie, be reasonable. Drop the charges before the press finds out. We can pay your medical bills. We will make it right. I did not react. I let the next message play. By the third voicemail, the fake tears had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, venomous snarl. You ungrateful, malicious little brat, Patricia hissed into the phone. You planned this. You brought that rich man to our house just to humiliate your sister, and now you are sending your father to jail. You have completely ruined Audrey's day. My expression began to change. The physical pain radiating from my fractured bone slowly faded into the background, eclipsed by a stone-cold absolute resolve. The final voicemails were not just angry rants. They were calculated, vicious threats. Listen to me very carefully, Clara. Patricia threatened in the last recording, her voice dropping to a harsh, guttural whisper. If you do not call the district attorney and drop this aggravated assault charge by tomorrow morning, I will personally destroy your life. I know exactly how to bankrupt you. I will make sure you lose that pathetic little apartment of yours. I will ruin your credit, your reputation, and your entire future. You think you are so smart, but we have ways to take absolutely everything from you. You will end up on the street with nothing. Call the police and fix this, or you are finished. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I set the phone down on the sterile tray table. The static camera frame captures the complete transformation in my eyes. The vulnerable, bleeding victim from the patio was gone. In her place was a woman forged from steel. I stared blankly ahead, analyzing her exact choice of words. I will ruin your credit. I will bankrupt you. Why would Patricia threaten the financial stability of a woman she believed was just a struggling, low-level data entry clerk? My mother thought I was already broke. Her threats were far too specific, far too confident. There was a deeply hidden layer to this hostility, a secret they were terrified I would uncover. Leo looked at me, his jaw tightening as he listened to the toxic vitriol. Tell me what you need me to do, he said quietly, ready to unleash his own legal team on them. I need to talk to DeAndre, I replied, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. Audrey threw herself at you today with the desperation of a drowning woman. She humiliated herself just to get her hands on your wealth. DeAndre knows why she is acting so erratic. He knows what is hiding behind their fake suburban perfection. I picked up my phone and sent a secure encrypted message to my brother-in-law. The text was brief and to the point. I asked DeAndre to meet me privately the moment I was discharged from the hospital. I needed to understand the exact root of Audrey's desperation. I needed to know exactly what kind of financial ruin my sister was facing that would drive my father to smash a brick into my face just to protect her ego. DeAndre replied less than a minute later. He agreed to meet me at a discreet, dimly lit coffee shop across town the following evening. He added a final chilling sentence to his text. You have no idea how deep their lies actually go. I locked my phone screen. The trap had been set. My family believed they were dealing with a frightened, helpless target who would eventually bow to their intimidation tactics. They believed their threats would force me into silent compliance. They had absolutely no clue that they had just threatened the financial ruin of a cybersecurity expert who could dismantle their entire digital existence with a few keystrokes. The rain beat a steady, muted rhythm against the frosted glass of the corner booth. We chose a dimly lit, independent coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, far from the polished country clubs and upscale bistros my parents frequented. The low amber lighting cast long shadows across the scarred wooden table, creating a heavy atmosphere of secrecy and alliance. I sat facing the door, a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low, and oversized sunglasses, concealing the thick white bandages plastered across the right side of my face. DeAndre slid into this booth opposite me. He placed a thick manila envelope on the table and pushed his untouched black coffee to the side. He looked exhausted, carrying the heavy burden of a man who had spent years fighting a losing battle behind closed doors. I am sorry about your face, Clara. DeAndre said, his voice quiet, but incredibly grounded. I tried to reach him faster, I really did. You saved my life, DeAndre, I replied firmly. I will never forget that. Now tell me what is inside that envelope. Tell me why my sister threw herself at a man she met 5 minutes ago with the sheer desperation of a wild animal. DeAndre let out a slow, bitter sigh. He tapped his index finger against the manila folder. Audrey is a complete fraud, he stated plainly. That perfect golden child image your parents love to parade around is nothing but a carefully funded illusion. Audrey is drowning and she is trying to drag everyone down with her. He opened the envelope and slid a stack of highlighted financial statements toward me. I leaned forward, scanning the rows of red numbers. The figures were staggering. She is a compulsive shopper and a gambling addict, DeAndre explained. His tone hardened by years of betrayal. She has completely drained our joint savings. When I cut off her access to my accounts, she started opening secret credit lines and taking out predatory high-interest loans. She owes over $300,000 to various creditors, and some of those lenders are not the kind of people who send polite collection letters. I stared at the financial ruin documented on the pages. The sheer volume of the debt made my stomach turn. This completely explained Audrey's unhinged behavior on the patio. She saw Leo not as a person, but as a walking ATM, a desperate last-minute escape hatch from the massive financial crater she had dug for herself. I am done covering for her. DeAndre continued, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute unyielding resolve. I am officially filing for divorce tomorrow morning. More importantly, I am filing for emergency full custody of our children. Her volatile behavior has escalated from just destroying our bank accounts to throwing destructive, violent tantrums at home. She is a danger to the kids, and I will not let her toxic entitlement infect them. Your parents have been bailing her out in secret for years, but this time the hole is too deep even for Richard to fill. I leaned back against the leather booth, processing the magnitude of his revelation. Audrey was bankrupt. My parents were secretly bleeding cash to sustain her fake lifestyle. Patricia's threat to ruin my credit suddenly echoed in my mind with terrifying clarity. If they were this desperate for cash, what exactly had they done in the dark to keep their golden child afloat? The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. The brick to my face was not just a sudden crime of passion fueled by a bruised ego. It was an act of pure, unadulterated panic. My parents had spent my entire life dismissing me as a nobody. They thought I was completely invisible. But then I walked onto their patio holding hands with Leo. Leo was a highly successful entrepreneur with significant wealth and top-tier financial resources. By marrying me, he would naturally merge our assets. He would introduce his elite financial advisors into my life. If my parents had done something illegal in the dark, a man like Leo, looking too closely at our family, would immediately expose them. They did not attack me just because Audrey was insulted. They attacked me because they were terrified of what Leo might uncover. I thanked DeAndre, grabbed my folder, and headed straight back to the secure penthouse apartment Leo had rented for my recovery. The physical pain in my face was entirely suppressed by the cold, calculating mindset of a cybersecurity executive. I was no longer a victim. I was an apex predator hunting in my own territory. I locked the heavy mahogany door to the home office. The room was pitch black except for the glowing ambient light of my high-performance dual monitors. We need quick, aggressive cuts here to establish the visual pacing. A tight shot of my fingers flying across the backlit mechanical keyboard. A rapid pan across the screens displaying cascading lines of encrypted data. An extreme close-up of my unblinking eyes illuminated by the harsh blue light of the monitors reflecting scrolling numbers and financial algorithms. I bypassed the standard credit reporting agencies. Those were for amateurs. I utilized the proprietary forensic software I had designed for my own cybersecurity firm, the same software we used to trace corporate embezzlement and phantom accounts. I started by running a deep dive background check into my own social security number. If Patricia was confident enough to threaten my credit score directly, she had to have a confirmed existing point of leverage. I needed to see exactly what she saw. The software bypassed the superficial layers of my financial history and dug straight into the bedrock of my legal identity. While the search algorithm compiled the data, I opened a second terminal. I launched a parallel forensic trace on Richard and Patricia. I targeted their public tax filings, their real estate holdings, and the shell companies Richard used to manage his suburban properties. I wanted to see the exact flow of their cash. I wanted to know how a family with a heavily mortgaged estate was secretly paying off hundreds of thousands of dollars in gambling debts for their golden child. The progress bars on both screens hit 100% simultaneously, the data populated in crisp, undeniable columns. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat as I read the first line of the decrypted financial report. The truth was far more sinister than a simple suburban lie. 2 years ago, my parents had executed a masterclass in financial betrayal. The screen displayed a massive commercial line of credit deliberately structured to remain hidden from standard consumer credit reports. The principal amount sat at exactly $500,000. The primary account holder was not Richard. It was not Patricia. It was me. My stellar credit score, meticulously built over a decade of disciplined financial independence, had been completely weaponized. I isolated the origination documents, pulling up the original digital loan applications. We need a macro lens here, pushing incredibly close onto the high-resolution monitor. The camera focuses tight on the digital signature line. The cursor highlights a flawless rendering of my electronic signature, backed by my exact Social Security number, and an outdated copy of my driver's license, from when I temporarily used their address during college. They had committed textbook federal identity theft. The forensic trail was absolute and undeniable. I ran a trace on the routing numbers connected to the loan disbursement. The visual cuts sharply to the bank transfer logs, treating the financial documents as a pristine crime scene. $500,000 had been deposited into a shell holding company registered under Richard's name. From there, the money hemorrhaged into multiple different accounts. The routing numbers matched the exact highlighted financial statements DeAndre had handed me hours earlier. My parents had not just bailed Audrey out of bankruptcy, they had completely sacrificed my financial existence to do it. They used the fraudulent funds to pay off her massive gambling debts, satisfy her aggressive creditors, and quietly maintain the illusion of their own wealthy lifestyle. They bought her designer clothes and funded her country club dinners using my stolen identity. When Patricia threatened to ruin my credit and bankrupt me in those voicemails, it was not an idle threat. It was a direct confession. She knew this loan existed because she was the one secretly paying the minimum monthly interest just to keep it from defaulting. If I sent Richard to prison, she would simply stop paying the interest, intentionally triggering a catastrophic default that would legally obliterate my financial foundation. They thought this hidden loan was their ultimate leverage. They assumed I was just a naive, struggling girl who would eventually be crushed by this invisible debt. They never considered that their chosen victim was a cybersecurity chief executive officer who tracked digital money laundering syndicates for a living. I did not feel sorrow or heartbreak looking at those forged documents. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed to utterly destroy them. The brick to my face was aggravated assault, but this digital signature was federal wire fraud. I exported every single file, every routing number, and every forged signature onto a secure encrypted drive. The trap was no longer just an idea. It was fully loaded and ready to snap shut. I stepped out of the heavy mahogany doors of the home office and walked into the main living space of the penthouse. The visual direction transitions here. We return to the warmly lit living room from the opening scene. The soft amber glow of the floor lamps and the plush, inviting furniture are still present, but the atmosphere has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer a sanctuary for a vulnerable, recovering victim. It is a war room. The coffee table previously holding my pain medication and tea is now cleared and repurposed as our central command station. I set my encrypted hard drive onto the glass surface with a heavy, definitive thud. Leo walked into the room, handing me a fresh ice pack for my throbbing cheekbone. He took one look at my posture and knew instantly that the parameters of our reality had changed. I did not shed a tear. I did not shake with residual trauma. I looked at the man I was going to marry and told him exactly what my parents had done in the dark. I laid out the meticulous, calculated financial assassination they had executed using my identity. Processing the psychological shock was a strange, almost out-of-body experience. For 33 years, I believed my family simply disliked me. I thought I was an unwanted burden, a disappointment who could never measure up to their golden child. The emotional neglect and the physical violence on the patio were horrific, but they were born from a twisted, toxic family dynamic. This financial betrayal was entirely different. It was premeditated. It was completely deliberate. They did not just despise me. They actively harvested my discipline, my hard work, and my spotless credit score to feed their own greed. They had treated my identity like a sacrificial lamb to keep Audrey drowning in luxury. It recontextualized every single interaction I had ever had with them. Every insult was a distraction. Every threat was a calculated measure to keep me compliant and blind to the theft. Leo sat down next to me on the sofa. He did not explode with immediate fiery rage. He did not yell or break anything. Instead, his eyes went incredibly cold, matching my exact frequency. The warmth that usually defined his personality hardened into a ruthless protective armor. He opened his own laptop and placed it right next to my encrypted drive. We did not need to have an emotional conversation about how much this hurt. We only needed to establish the logistics of our counterattack. We spent the next 12 hours systematically compiling the digital footprint of their crimes. This could not just be a collection of suspicious bank statements. It had to be a bulletproof, inescapable legal snare. I used my cybersecurity expertise to trace the original IP addresses tied to the fraudulent loan applications. Unsurprisingly, the digital signatures had been executed from the exact IP address registered to my parents' Connecticut estate. They had not even bothered to mask their location, arrogant in their belief that I would never possess the technical skills to uncover their tracks. Leo utilized his elite financial background to map the money laundering network. He cross-referenced the routing numbers I had extracted from the loan disbursement with the offshore accounts Richard used for his real estate holding companies. We mapped the exact flow of funds. We tracked the precise dates the money was moved from the fraudulent credit line into Richard's accounts, and then watched it splinter off into payments for Audrey's high-interest loans, her luxury car leases, and her country club dues. We built a flawless, unassailable chain of custody for every single stolen dollar. We exported the metadata, capturing the precise timestamps of the digital signatures and matching them against my own geolocation data from 2 years ago, proving definitively that I was across the country speaking at a tech conference when the documents were allegedly signed by me in Connecticut. Every piece of evidence was layered, encrypted, and backed up across multiple secure servers. If Richard tried to hire a team of aggressive defense lawyers to find a loophole, they would hit a solid wall of verified time-stamped forensic data. As the sun began to rise over the city skyline, casting a pale gray light into our war room, we finalized the evidence dossier. The entire case was meticulously indexed and ready for federal review. Leo handed me a fresh cup of coffee. We sat in the quiet morning light looking at the glowing screens that held the keys to my family's total destruction. We could have called the local police right then. We could have sent an angry, explosive email confronting Patricia about the voicemails. But doing so would only give them the opportunity to destroy evidence or flee. Confronting toxic, narcissistic people with raw anger only feeds their ego and gives them a stage to play the victim. We decided right then and there to completely strip them of that privilege. There would be no screaming matches. There would be no dramatic, tearful showdowns in their pristine suburban living room. We were going to let Richard and Patricia believe they had successfully silenced me. We were going to let them feel utterly invincible. We would allow them to continue their arrogant posturing and their vicious smear campaigns, confident in their assumption that I was broken and terrified. We chose to construct a legal trap so tightly woven and so absolute that by the time they realized the jaws had snapped shut, they would already be wearing federal handcuffs. We were not just going to beat them in a petty family dispute. We were going to cleanly and legally eradicate their entire empire. The following Monday morning, the real work began. I did not drive back to a local police precinct to argue with biased suburban cops or easily manipulated desk sergeants. My cybersecurity firm routinely contracted with federal law enforcement to track digital crimes. I had direct encrypted lines to people who did not care about country club memberships or local police benevolent donations. I picked up my secure phone and bypassed the standard switchboards entirely. I dialed the direct cell phone number of Special Agent Hayes, a lead investigator in the Federal Financial Crimes Division stationed in New York. I requested an urgent meeting. The visual direction shifts to the austere architecture of the federal building in Lower Manhattan. We need crisp, wide, establishing shots of the heavy revolving glass doors. Inside, the environment lacks warmth. It is a space defined by harsh fluorescent lighting, polished floors, and security checkpoints. This is the machinery of absolute consequence. I walked through the metal detectors with my encrypted hard drive in my briefcase. My fractured cheekbone and 15 stitches were concealed beneath dark sunglasses, but my posture was rigid and purposeful. I sat across from Special Agent Hayes in a windowless interview room. The table was brushed steel. No fake tears or emotional manipulations existed here. I unzipped my briefcase, sliding the printed dossier and encrypted flash drive across the table. I laid out the exact undeniable sequence of events, classifying the $500,000 forged loan as textbook federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Hayes opened the dossier. The camera focuses on the crisp, black text on the white federal forms. He reviewed the address logs, the metadata timestamps matching the fraudulent signatures, and geolocation data, proving I was 3,000 miles away when the loan was executed. Agents operate entirely on logic. They look for established patterns, clear motives, and undeniable paper trails. After 20 minutes of reviewing the forensic evidence Leo and me compiled, Hayes nodded. He did not offer emotional sympathy. He offered the swift, inescapable grip of federal prosecution. Since the loan crossed state lines digitally, it triggered federal jurisdiction. Richard and Patricia escalated their greed into a federal crime. Hayes initiated the formal case file. I watched him type the felony charges directly into the secure database. The true beauty of federal investigations is their absolute silence. Local police might leak information to the press or show up with flashing sirens, but federal agents move like a shadow. Hayes assured me they would begin issuing secret subpoenas to the corporate banks involved. They would quietly monitor Richard's holding companies and trace every single illicit wire transfer without ever alerting my parents. My family would continue going to fancy dinners and hosting their elite social events, completely unaware that federal agents were methodically mapping out their lengthy prison sentences. Criminal charges for identity theft were only the first half of my meticulously designed trap. To ensure the total eradication of their fake empire, I needed to completely dismantle their financial safety nets. Leaving the federal building, I directed my unwavering attention to the Internal Revenue Service. Richard had funneled the stolen $500,000 through his real estate shell companies to pay off Audrey's massive gambling debts and luxury car leases. He treated that stolen money as personal disposable income, but I knew for an absolute fact he had never declared a single cent of it on his annual tax returns. In the unforgiving eyes of the Internal Revenue Service, undeclared income, even if it is stolen or fraudulently obtained, is textbook tax evasion. The visual cues here must focus heavily on the methodical, sterile filling of federal documents. Extreme macro lens close-ups of Form 3949A, the official information referral document used to report suspected corporate tax fraud. I typed in Richard's full legal name, Patricia's name, and the specific employer identification numbers for every single shell company they operated. I attached the bank routing numbers and the precise highlighted flow of the laundered funds. I submitted the entire comprehensive package directly to the Criminal Investigation Division through their highly secure encrypted portal. The federal tax system is a relentless, unfeeling machine. Once it locks onto financial discrepancies of this massive magnitude, it absolutely does not negotiate. It seizes physical assets, freezes bank accounts, and liquidates luxury properties without hesitation. By Tuesday evening, the trap was fully operational. I had triggered two separate massive federal investigations that would strike simultaneously. I sat in Leo's penthouse watching the official confirmation emails hit my secure inbox. The bureaucratic gears were officially turning. The camera slowly pans out to show the quiet, calculated efficiency of the room. No shouting, no violence, just the silent, devastating power of the law, taking its inevitable course. My parents believed they were untouchable because they had managed to manipulate local police officers with their superficial wealth and status. They thought their pristine reputation in a wealthy zip code made them invincible. They failed to realize that federal agencies do not care about who you play golf with or what expensive designer dress you wear. The legal snare was constructed with mathematical precision. The Federal Bureau was building the wire fraud and identity theft case to permanently take their freedom, while the tax agency was building the evasion case to take every single dollar they owned. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the dull, steady throb of my healing cheekbone. The physical scar would remain forever, but the psychological hold they had over me was completely and permanently severed. They had thrown a heavy brick to break my face and protect their fabricated reality. In response, I quietly unleashed the full, crushing weight of the federal government to dismantle their entire world. All we had to do now was wait for them to plan their next public performance, allowing them to climb onto the highest possible stage before we pulled the floor out from under them. The trap was set, and the execution required zero interference on my part. We need sharp, rapid cross-cutting here to visually emphasize the massive disparity between the silent impending justice and my family's loud, arrogant delusions. The scene must constantly shift back and forth, building a suffocating layer of dramatic irony. Cut to the sterile, highly secured Financial Crimes Division in Lower Manhattan. The room is dead quiet save for the rhythmic, calculated clacking of mechanical keyboards. Special Agent Hayes sits in front of a massive array of high-resolution monitors. There are no dramatic speeches here. There is only raw, unfeeling data. He pulls up the specific routing numbers I provided, feeding them directly into the federal banking tracking database. The software instantly maps the illicit digital pathways Richard used to launder the stolen $500,000. The camera pushes in close on the screen. The glowing digital lines connect the fraudulent commercial loan taken out in my name directly to a complex web of offshore shell accounts located in the Cayman Islands. These were the exact accounts Audrey used to hide her assets and dodge her local creditors. With a single decisive keystroke, Hayes submits the federal injunction to the international banking authorities. A bright red notification blinks across the terminal. Accounts frozen. Asset seizure initiated. Audrey's secret financial lifelines are instantly completely severed, and she does not even receive a single notification on her phone. Cut abruptly to the blinding sunlit patio of the most exclusive country club in Connecticut. The contrast is visually jarring. The quiet hum of federal servers is immediately replaced by the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and obnoxious, booming laughter. Richard had easily posted bail just hours after his arrest at the hospital, utilizing a high-priced local bondsman. Now he stands by the club's pristine infinity pool, completely in his element. He is wearing a crisp linen suit, holding a highball glass, and holding court with a group of wealthy local businessmen. He looks entirely unbothered by the felony assault charge currently pending against him. He waves his hand dismissively, spinning a masterful web of lies for his audience. Richard tells his affluent peers that the hospital incident was a massive overreaction by an overzealous rookie cop. He claims he was simply trying to disarm a hysterical, drunken altercation I started, painting himself as the stoic patriarch forced to intervene for my own good. The men around him nod in sympathetic agreement, totally buying the fabricated narrative that I am the sole problem. Cut back to the dark, windowless federal office. The camera pans slowly across a massive whiteboard, where field agents are pinning up printed bank statements and magnified images of the forged digital signatures. They are meticulously tracing the secondary and tertiary wire transfers. They identify the exact transactions where the stolen funds were used to pay off Audrey's high-interest gambling debts, her luxury vehicle leases, and her exorbitant shopping bills. Every single purchase is logged as a separate, distinct count of wire fraud. They cross-reference the federal tax filings, highlighting the blank spaces where Richard blatantly failed to report the laundered cash. The agents work with lethal, emotionless precision. They are not building a case to negotiate a plea deal. They are building a bulletproof case to ensure a maximum federal prison sentence. The trap tightens layer by layer, legally locking down every possible loophole my father's expensive defense attorneys might try to exploit. Cut back to the country club dining room. Patricia sits at a table draped in pristine white linen, surrounded by influential society wives. She leans in close, lowering her voice to a theatrical, conspiratorial whisper. She is launching a full-scale smear campaign against me, executing a brutal character assassination with a warm maternal smile. Patricia tells the wealthy women that I have suffered a severe tragic mental breakdown. She claims I have always been deeply jealous of Audrey, and that my sudden engagement to a wealthy man made me completely unhinged and combative. She sighs dramatically, touching her expensive diamond necklace, and says it breaks her heart to see her own daughter become so ungrateful, violent, and detached from reality. Audrey sits right beside her, sipping a fresh mimosa, playing the role of the traumatized victim perfectly. They are completely oblivious. They sit there drinking expensive champagne, paid for by stolen money, entirely unaware that their offshore bank accounts currently hold a balance of absolute zero. The cross-cutting accelerates, matching the rising tension of the narrative. We see Agent Hayes signing a stack of federal subpoenas, officially demanding the immediate surrender of Richard's corporate financial records. We see Richard laughing loudly on the golf course, bragging about an upcoming commercial real estate acquisition he plans to fund with his hidden credit lines. We see the federal banking system flagging Audrey's credit cards, rendering the plastic in her designer purse completely useless. We see Patricia booking an extravagant ballroom venue for their upcoming charity event, putting down a massive non-refundable deposit without a single second thought. They are living in a temporary fantasy, a fragile glass house built entirely on my stolen identity. They assumed my silence over the past few days was absolute proof of their victory. They believed their local influence had successfully intimidated me into eventually dropping the assault charges. They thought the brick to my face was the end of the war. But my silence was not a surrender. It was the tactical quiet of a sniper lining up the perfect, inescapable shot. By continuing their arrogant posturing and publicly smearing my name across their social circles, they were simply digging their own graves significantly deeper. Every lie they told their country club friends would only make their imminent public destruction that much more humiliating. I sat in Leo's secure penthouse, monitoring the digital shockwaves as the federal freeze took effect across their accounts. The board was perfectly set. The federal warrants were signed and ready for execution. My family was about to throw the biggest, most expensive social event of the season, stepping right onto the glittering stage we had meticulously prepared for their absolute downfall. The invitations for the annual Autumn Hope Charity Gala arrived across Connecticut just 4 days after the hospital incident. My parents hosted this specific event every year, but the stakes were entirely different this time. This was not a genuine philanthropic endeavor. This was a desperate, calculated social laundering operation. Patricia and Richard needed to aggressively wash their tarnished reputation, bury rumors of the patio assault, and project absolute financial invincibility. They also needed to secure a new, oblivious, wealthy suitor for Audrey before DeAndre finalized the divorce and her ruin became public. To capture their desperate facade, the visual direction plunges directly into the overwhelming tacky excess of the gala. The grand ballroom of the state's most exclusive country club is transformed into a garish display of stolen wealth. The camera pans across towering 10-foot floral arrangements composed of imported white orchids that choke the room with a heavy, sweet perfume. In the center of the massive room sits a grotesque, life-sized ice sculpture of a swan serving premium imported vodka through its beak into crystal glasses. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulate endlessly, carrying silver trays completely loaded with beluga caviar and popping bottles of vintage champagne that cost thousands of dollars each. The lighting is blindingly bright, reflecting off the gold leaf accents on the dining tables and the ostentatious diamond jewelry dripping from Patricia's neck. It is a loud, suffocating spectacle of new money desperation, designed specifically to blind the local high society from the rotting foundation beneath it. My mother floated through the ballroom in a custom floor-length emerald gown that she had undoubtedly charged to the fraudulent credit line tied to my social security number. She played the role of the benevolent, untouchable matriarch with nauseating perfection. She cornered the wives of prominent judges and local politicians, offering them a practiced, sympathetic sigh whenever someone brought up my name. Patricia spun a tragic, completely fabricated tale about how I had suffered a total mental collapse. She told these influential women that I was currently residing in a specialized psychiatric facility, receiving the best care money could buy, completely funded by her and Richard. She used my fictitious breakdown to garner sympathy and admiration, casting herself as the resilient self-sacrificing mother bearing an impossible burden. Richard was executing his own performance near the private cigar lounge. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, laughing boisterously with investment bankers and real estate magnates. He clapped men on the shoulder, projecting the effortless dominance of a man who owned the world. He casually bragged about expanding his commercial real estate portfolio, dropping hints about a massive upcoming acquisition. The irony was physically repulsive. He was bragging about spending capital that did not exist, standing in a rented ballroom while facing an impending federal indictment for wire fraud and aggravated assault. He felt completely untouchable, utterly convinced that his local connections and superficial charm made him immune to consequences. But the most pathetic display of the evening belonged entirely to Audrey. My sister was on the hunt, with her secret offshore accounts currently frozen by federal authorities and her credit cards declining at every retail store. She was in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. However, Audrey possessed a terrifying ability to mask her desperation under a thick layer of cosmetic perfection. She wore a plunging scarlet silk dress, strategically positioning herself near the VIP seating area. Her target for the evening was a young, naive heir to a local shipping empire, a man known for his massive trust fund and his distinct lack of common sense. The camera must focus on Audrey's predatory body language. She leaned in uncomfortably close to the young heir, laughing too loudly at his mediocre jokes, touching his arm with calculated frequency. She batted her eyelashes, spinning a sob story about her upcoming divorce. Audrey painted DeAndre as an emotionally unavailable, controlling husband who simply could not understand her refined lifestyle. She played the vulnerable, misunderstood beauty, practically begging the wealthy heir to step in and rescue her from her domestic nightmare. She needed a new financial host to latch onto before the banks realized her assets were frozen by the federal government. She needed a ring on her finger and access to a new bank account before her pristine suburban facade completely shattered. Watching this unfold through the live social media feeds of their oblivious guests was a surreal experience. Leo and I sat in the penthouse, tracking the gala through the endless stream of tagged photos and videos uploaded by the country club elite. We watched my family dance, drink, and lie through their teeth. They were celebrating their perceived victory, toasting to their own brilliance, completely unaware that every single expensive bottle of champagne they opened was just adding another count of financial fraud to their federal indictment. They believed they had successfully rewritten reality. They thought the opulent ice sculptures, the caviar, and the designer gowns proved they were superior, untouchable beings. But the extreme excess of the gala only highlighted the absolute fragility of their lies. It was a paper-thin illusion, held together by stolen money and blinding arrogance. The louder the music played and the more champagne flowed, the more satisfying their inevitable destruction would be. The trap was ticking down to its final seconds. The federal agents were fully briefed. The arrest warrants were printed, signed, and currently sitting in the hands of the tactical team preparing to move. My parents had spent over $100,000 on a single night just to prove they were better than me. They had built the most magnificent, glittering stage in the entire state of Connecticut. They had gathered the wealthiest, most influential people in their social circle to serve as their captive audience. They had perfectly orchestrated the exact setting for their own spectacular, inescapable ruin. The time for silent observation was officially over. It was time to crash the party. I turned away from the glowing monitors in the penthouse living room and closed my laptop with a decisive snap. The digital surveillance phase was complete. Now the physical execution required absolute precision. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Special Agent Hayes one final time. The line connected instantly, devoid of any standard greeting. Hayes operated on the same wavelength of cold efficiency that I did. I confirmed our exact estimated time of arrival at the country club. He verified that his federal tactical team was already in position, parked discreetly in unmarked black vehicles along the perimeter of the manicured golf course. They had successfully locked down the exits, ensuring that once the warrants were executed, Richard and Patricia would have absolutely no route of escape. Hayes instructed me to proceed directly to the audio-visual booth overlooking the main ballroom. I was to give the federal agents a 5-minute window to move into the service corridors before I triggered the digital presentation. The coordination was flawless, a perfectly synchronized military operation designed to obliterate a suburban facade. A sharp knock at the penthouse door signaled DeAndre's arrival. Leo opened the door and my brother-in-law stepped into the foyer. DeAndre looked entirely transformed. The exhausted, beaten-down man from the dim coffee shop had been replaced by an unyielding force. He wore a sharply tailored midnight blue suit that commanded immediate respect. Tucked securely under his right arm was a thick black leather folder. Inside that folder rested the emergency full custody orders signed by a family court judge just hours earlier, right alongside his finalized divorce filings. He held the legal documents that would permanently sever Audrey's toxic grip on his children. DeAndre met my gaze, and a silent, unbreakable pact was forged between us. We were no longer victims of my family's narcissism. We were the architects of their ruin. The visual direction must shift here to a slow-motion, highly cinematic preparation sequence, capturing the transformation from survivors to executioners. The lighting in the penthouse bedroom is stark and dramatic, casting deep, purposeful shadows. The camera follows Leo as he slides into a bespoke jet-black tuxedo. His movements are sharp and methodical. He adjusts his cufflinks with the cold focus of an assassin preparing for a calculated strike. His presence radiates an impenetrable protective armor standing ready to shield me from the inevitable fallout of the evening. The focus then transitions entirely to me sitting perfectly still before the expansive vanity mirror. The camera utilizes extreme macro lens shots, gliding over the array of cosmetics spread across the glass surface. I pick up a heavy, full-coverage foundation, the kind designed to mask severe trauma and hide any perceived imperfections. For my entire life, my parents had forced me to cover up, to shrink myself, to hide anything that did not fit their manufactured reality. I looked at the heavy makeup bottle, and then I looked at my reflection. The right side of my face bore the undeniable signature of my father's violence. The severe swelling had finally subsided, but a distinct, jagged scar now tracked across my cheekbone, surrounded by a fading halo of yellowish-purple bruising. Patricia had laughed when the brick struck my face. She had gleefully predicted that this physical damage would make me unlovable, that Leo would walk away from a broken, ugly woman. She believed this scar was my ultimate defeat. I set the bottle of foundation down on the vanity untouched. I chose not to cover the damage. I chose to leave the fading scar completely visible under the harsh, bright lights. The camera pushes in close on the jagged line of healing skin, emphasizing the visceral reality of my survival. In that slow motion sequence, the scar ceases to be a mark of victimization. It actively transforms into a badge of absolute power. It is the physical proof that I took their hardest, most brutal hit, and it did not break me. It is the undeniable evidence of their criminality displayed proudly for their entire high society audience to witness. I applied a sharp, deep crimson lipstick, my hand completely steady. I stood up from the vanity and stepped into the dress I had chosen for the evening. It was a structured architectural black gown that fit like a suit of modern armor. It possessed sharp, unforgiving lines, entirely devoid of the frills and tacky embellishments Audrey favored. The dark fabric stood in stark contrast to the garish, colorful excess my family was currently parading around the country club. It was the wardrobe of an executioner, arriving to deliver a final verdict. Leo stepped up behind me, resting his hands firmly on my shoulders. Our eyes met in the reflection of the vanity mirror. There was no fear, no hesitation, and absolutely no lingering sorrow over the family I was about to destroy. We were completely aligned. We walked out of the bedroom and joined DeAndre in the living room. The three of us stood together, a united front of cold, calculated justice. We stepped into the private elevator, the doors sliding shut with a heavy metallic finality. The descent to the underground parking garage was silent. The tension in the enclosed space was palpable, crackling with anticipated energy. A sleek black town car waited for us in the subterranean shadows, its engine idling with a low, predatory hum. The drive to the country club took exactly 22 minutes. I watched the city lights streak past the tinted windows, my mind running through the precise logistical steps of the plan. I visualized the layout of the grand ballroom, the location of the audiovisual booth, and the exact moment I would override their projected slideshow. As the town car turned onto the long, winding road leading to the exclusive country club, the massive, brightly lit estate came into view. My family was inside, drinking stolen champagne, basking in their fake glory, entirely convinced that they had outsmarted the world. They were at the absolute peak of their delusion. The car rolled to a smooth stop just past the main valet stand, pulling directly into the shadows near the service entrance, as coordinated with Special Agent Hayes. The night air was crisp and biting as I stepped out of the vehicle. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement. The storm that was about to hit that ballroom was not an act of nature. It was an act of absolute, unapologetic consequence, and I was holding the trigger. We pushed through the heavy brass service doors, stepping into the dimly lit corridor that ran parallel to the main ballroom. The contrast between the freezing outdoor air and the stifling, overheated interior of the country club was instantaneous. Shadowy figures moved deliberately along the walls. Special Agent Hayes stood near a stack of catering trays, dressed in an unassuming dark suit that perfectly camouflaged him among the event staff. He gave me a single crisp nod. His tactical team was fully positioned, blanketing every possible exit. The perimeter was secured. Nobody was getting out. I gave a slight nod in return, signaling that we were ready to initiate the final sequence. Leo took his position on my right side, his presence a solid, immovable wall of protection. DeAndre stepped up to my left, his jaw clenched tight, the black leather folder tucked securely under his arm. We moved in perfect synchronization. The visual direction demands a sweeping, continuous tracking shot right here. The camera positions itself just ahead of us, moving backward smoothly as we approach the heavy velvet curtains that separate the service hallway from the grand ballroom. Leo reached out and pulled the thick fabric aside. We stepped out of the shadows and directly into the blinding, garish light of my parents' fraudulent empire. The ballroom was a suffocating spectacle of stolen wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across tables draped in silver silk. The deafening hum of classical music and arrogant high society chatter filled the massive space. The tracking shot locks onto me, capturing my steady, relentless stride as we merge into the sea of elite guests. I kept my head held high, my eyes fixed dead ahead. The architectural black gown I wore absorbed the harsh lighting, making me stand out like a sharp, dark blade, cutting through a room filled with pastel silks and tasteless diamonds. It took exactly 10 seconds for the first guest to notice my arrival. A wealthy judge's wife standing near an ice sculpture lowered her champagne flute. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. She nudged the woman next to her. The whisper spread outward like a drop of ink in a glass of water. Patricia had spent the entire evening circulating through this exact crowd, feeding them a meticulously crafted, tear-jerking narrative about my severe mental breakdown. She had painted a tragic picture of a hysterical, violent daughter locked away in an expensive psychiatric ward. The guests turned to look at me, fully expecting to see a broken, unstable woman. Instead, they saw a completely composed, stone-cold cybersecurity chief executive officer, flanked by two incredibly intimidating men. The continuous tracking shot captures the dawning horror and confusion on the faces of the country club elite. They stared at my face. They stared at the jagged, healing scar tracking across my cheekbone, and the fading purple bruising around my eye. The physical evidence of my father's brutal assault completely shattered Patricia's pristine lies. A psychiatric breakdown does not leave a woman needing 15 facial stitches. The whispers turned into a frantic, chaotic buzzing. The crowd physically parted before me. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer gowns stepped backward, creating a wide, clear path down the center of the ballroom. At the far end of the room, completely oblivious to the shifting tide of the crowd, my father stood on the grand stage. Richard was bathed in a bright, flattering spotlight. He gripped the microphone with both hands, projecting the ultimate image of a humble, resilient patriarch. The massive projection screen behind him displayed a rotating gallery of perfectly curated family photos, notably excluding any images of me. "Family is the ultimate foundation," Richard projected into the microphone, his voice dripping with nauseating, fake sincerity. "In times of hardship, we are tested. We are pushed to our absolute limits. But true character is forged in the fires of adversity. My wife Patricia and I have faced unimaginable private struggles this year. We have dealt with heartbreaks that would shatter lesser families." He paused, bowing his head to farm sympathy from the audience. A collective, pitiful sigh rippled through the front rows. "But we stand here tonight to tell you that love and unity conquer all." Richard continued, raising his head with a triumphant, sickening smile. "Look at my beautiful daughter Audrey standing strong after facing her own unwarranted personal trials. We protect our own. We shield our loved ones from the cruelty of the world. That is the family promise. That is what this charity gala represents. Supporting those who have been struck down by unpredictable tragedies." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of his words was physically repulsive. He was lecturing a room full of millionaires about shielding loved ones from cruelty just days after he had deliberately smashed a brick into my face to protect a lie. He was preaching about financial charity while secretly funding his daughter's gambling addiction with a $500,000 fraudulent loan taken out in my stolen name. The tracking shot follows my relentless march down the center aisle. The path cleared entirely. The frantic whispering of the guests finally reached the front rows. The murmurs grew so loud that they began to drown out the classical string quartet playing in the corner. Patricia, seated at the VIP table right beneath the stage, finally turned her head to see what was causing the commotion. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the polished marble floor, splashing red wine across the hem of her expensive emerald gown. The color instantly drained from her face. She grabbed the edge of the table, her eyes bulging in sheer, unfiltered terror as she looked at my scarred face and the two men flanking me. Audrey, seated 2 chairs down, literally froze mid-sip of her drink. She saw DeAndre walking beside me, clutching the black legal folder, and her jaw dropped open. The predatory, confident smirk she had been wearing all night vanished, replaced by the cornered, erratic panic of a woman whose fake reality was violently collapsing. Up on the stage, Richard finally sensed the catastrophic shift in the room's energy. He faltered mid-sentence. He squinted through the harsh glare of the spotlight, looking down the center aisle. The microphone picked up the sharp, ragged intake of his breath as his eyes locked onto mine. He stopped speaking completely. The grand, inspirational speech died in his throat. The silence in the massive ballroom became deafening thick, with an immense, suffocating tension. I did not stop walking. I did not break eye contact with my father. But I did not march toward the stage to engage in a screaming match. I veered sharply to the left, heading directly toward the elevated audio-visual control booth stationed at the perimeter of the room. Leo moved smoothly to block the narrow staircase leading up to the booth, crossing his arms and daring anyone to intervene. DeAndre stood beside him, presenting an absolute wall of defense. I stepped up into the control booth, sliding the panicked sound technician out of the way. The stage was perfectly set. The audience was completely captivated. It was time to project the truth. I bypassed the country club firewall in a matter of seconds. The frightened audio-visual technician watched in stunned silence as I pulled the master connection cable from his laptop and plugged it directly into my encrypted hard drive. I did not say a word to him. I simply ran the execution command I had coded perfectly for this exact moment. The massive 20-foot projection screen behind my father went pitch black. The gentle classical string music piping through the ballroom speakers abruptly cut off, replaced by a sharp, high-pitched electronic whine that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. Up on the stage, Richard tapped his microphone, assuming it was a technical glitch. He plastered on his fake, charming smile, preparing to make a joke to the audience. He never got the chance. The screen flared to life in blinding high-definition 4K resolution. The towering projection illuminated the entire grand ballroom with the crisp, undeniable reality of my family. The video started playing without any introduction. It was the raw, unedited dashcam footage from DeAndre parked Tesla. The hidden microphones caught the ambient sounds of the suburban patio, instantly transporting the elite guests from their lavish charity gala right back to the scene of the crime. The state-of-the-art surround sound system amplified Audrey's shrill, entitled voice. Her words echoed off the crystal chandeliers bouncing off the silk-draped tables. The entire high society crowd listened in complete stunned silence as Audrey boldly demanded that Leo leave me for her. They watched my sister desperately throw herself at a wealthy man, claiming I was too ugly and too boring to exist in his world. They heard Leo coldly and surgically dismantle her delusions. Then the focal point of the video shifted. The massive projection zoomed in on my father. The room full of judges, politicians, and real estate magnates watched their respected peer lose his mind entirely. They saw Richard's face contort into a mask of pure, unrestrained violence. They watched him lunge for the stone fire pit. They saw him grab the heavy decorative brick. There was no glitch. There was no misunderstanding. The high-definition lens showed the deliberate, calculated wind-up. The horrific, sickening crack of the brick, smashing directly into my face, boomed through the country club subwoofers. Several women in the front row physically shrieked. A prominent local judge dropped his champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the marble floor in a brutal echo of the violence on screen. The visual direction demands a dramatic orbit 360-degree shot right here. I stepped out from the shadowy perimeter of the audio-visual booth, walking slowly to the center of the elevated balcony. The camera begins a sweeping, continuous circular motion entirely around me. As the lens orbits, it captures the synchronized shock, absolute horror, and visceral disgust blooming across the faces of the high society guests below. The camera catches the horrified gasps, the hands flying to cover mouths, the looks of sheer revulsion directed straight at the stage. It spins back to my face, highlighting my fading scar, illuminated by the glow of the projection, establishing me as the calm, immovable epicenter of the chaos. The video on the screen did not grant them any mercy. It continued playing, displaying Patricia standing just feet away from my bleeding body. The towering image showed my mother clapping her hands together, throwing her head back and laughing loudly at my destruction. Her cruel, mocking voice vibrated through the speakers. The women Patricia had just spent the entire evening lying to the influential society wives she had manipulated for sympathy, stared up at her projected image with absolute unadulterated revulsion. Patricia physically shrank into her chair, trying to make herself invisible, but the harsh glow of her own malice pinned her down. The dashcam footage ended with DeAndre heroically tackling my father to the ground, shielding me while Richard screamed vile racist insults that further horrified the affluent crowd. But my presentation was far from over. The physical violence was only the appetizer. The main course was the financial assassination. The screen cut to black for a fraction of a second before flashing a series of pristine, highly magnified digital documents. I utilized extreme macro-lens precision to display the undeniable forensic evidence. A massive official bank document filled the 20-foot screen. The header clearly identified it as a $500,000 commercial line of credit. The primary account holder was clearly listed as me. A bright red graphic circle appeared on the screen, isolating the digital signature line. The cursor zoomed in relentlessly, highlighting the forged electronic rendering of my name. The metadata timestamp appeared right next to it, proving exactly when and where the fraud was committed. The IP address matched my parents' estate down to the exact router. I triggered the next slide. A complex, undeniable money laundering web populated the screen. Bright, glowing digital arrows connected the $500,000 fraudulent loan directly into an offshore shell company registered under Richard's name. The crowd watched in absolute silence as the data mapped the precise flow of stolen funds. The arrows split off, tracing the wire transfers directly into accounts held by Audrey. The presentation displayed undeniable bank routing numbers paying off Audrey massive gambling debts. It showed wire transfers covering her luxury car leases and satisfying aggressive creditors. It explicitly highlighted the transactions where my stolen identity was used to purchase the very designer dress Patricia was currently wearing. Every single lie they had built their empire upon was stripped away, backed by bulletproof federal-level forensic data. Richard stood frozen on the stage. The spotlight that had previously glorified him now served as a harsh interrogation lamp. The men he had been laughing with just moments before, the wealthy investors he had bragged to about his commercial real estate acquisitions, stared at him with absolute contempt. In the elite business world, physical violence was shocking, but massive financial fraud and identity theft were unforgivable sins. Richard was completely exposed as a desperate thieving fraud who had bankrupted his own daughter to fund his fake lifestyle. Audrey sat at the VIP table, visibly trembling. The young, wealthy shipping heir she had been manipulating all evening stood up abruptly, shooting her a look of utter disgust, and quickly walked away. Her fabricated persona as an innocent, refined victim was obliterated. The screen prominently displayed her massive hidden debts for everyone in her social circle to judge. She was drowning, and this time there was absolutely no fraudulent money left to bail her out. I stood on the balcony looking down at the utter devastation I had orchestrated. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to scream or cry to demand justice. I had let their own actions, their own greed, and their own violence speak for them. The trap had snapped shut with terrifying efficiency. My family had built a magnificent stage to celebrate their fake supremacy, and I had simply utilized their expensive projector to broadcast their true, horrific nature to the world. The silence in the grand ballroom did not last. It shattered with the force of a detonated explosive. The collective shock of the high society guests morphed instantly into absolute unfiltered chaos. Outraged gasps turned into shouted accusations. Investors who had just shaken my father's hand aggressively wiped their palms on their expensive trousers as if trying to scrub away a disease. Women in designer gowns physically backed away from the VIP table where my mother sat frozen. The elite social circle my parents had worshipped their entire lives was now treating them like a highly contagious plague. Up on the stage, the gravity of the federal evidence finally broke through Richard's thick skull. The arrogant patriarch realized there was no manipulating his way out of a digitally verified money laundering scheme. He dropped the microphone. It hit the hardwood stage with a piercing, high-pitched squeal that made the front row wince. Richard did not try to explain himself. He did not look at my mother. He turned on his heel and bolted. He abandoned his grand stage and scrambled toward the heavy velvet curtains masking the rear service exit, desperately trying to flee the consequences of his own greed. He did not make it 3 steps. The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom were violently shoved open. The ambient romantic amber lighting of the gala was instantly obliterated. The stark, unromantic glare of heavy-duty tactical flashlights swept across the room. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, a fleet of unmarked federal vehicles and local police cruisers converged on the property. The harsh, erratic flashes of red and blue police lights cut through the darkness outside, piercing the glass panes and reflecting wildly off the thousands of crystals in the ballroom chandeliers. The visual contrast was jarring and deeply poetic. The warm artificial glow of their fake wealth was violently overwritten by the cold, unforgiving illumination of the law. Special Agent Hayes marched down the center aisle, flanked by a dozen heavily armed FBI agents and local police officers. The crowd of millionaires scrambled out of their way, pressing themselves against the silk-draped tables to avoid interfering with a federal raid. Hayes did not waste time with pleasantries. He pointed a firm finger directly at the stage. "Richard, you are under arrest," Hayes announced, his voice carrying incredible booming authority over the chaotic murmurs of the room. He signaled 2 local officers who intercepted my father just as he frantically clawed at the service exit curtains. They slammed him against the polished wood paneling of the stage. The sound of heavy metal handcuffs clicking securely around my father's wrists echoed sharply through the room. Down at the VIP table, Patricia finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She jumped to her feet, her expensive emerald gown tangling around her legs. She raised her hands wildly, attempting to stop the federal agents closing in on her. "You cannot do this!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Do you know who we are? We are hosting a charity event. We are respectable people. This is a massive mistake." A female federal agent grabbed Patricia's wrists smoothly, twisting them behind her back. The agent locked a second pair of heavy steel cuffs onto my mother. "Patricia, you are being taken into federal custody," the agent stated in a flat, clinical tone. "You and your husband are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. Local authorities are also executing a warrant for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start utilizing it right now." Patricia's knees buckled. The reality of the federal charges completely crushed her. The society wives she had been trying to impress all night were holding up their phones recording her humiliating public arrest. She was dragged down the center aisle, her designer heels scraping against the marble floor, sobbing hysterically as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated her absolute destruction. At the VIP table, Audrey was hyperventilating. Her primary financial hosts were currently being hauled away in handcuffs. The massive offshore accounts she used to hide her gambling debts were frozen. Her entire world was evaporating. She looked frantically around the room until her eyes locked onto me standing safely up in the audio-visual booth. "Clara," Audrey shrieked, her voice a desperate pleading wail. "Clara, please tell them to stop. Tell Leo to fix this. We are your family. I have nothing left. Please help me." I looked down at her, my face a mask of stone-cold indifference. I did not move a single muscle to help her, but someone else did step forward. DeAndre emerged from the shadows near the ballroom entrance. He walked with slow, deliberate purpose toward the VIP table. He did not look at the police. He did not look at the shocked guests. He walked straight up to the woman who had treated him like garbage for years. He held the thick black leather folder in his right hand. Audrey turned to him, a wild spark of hope lighting up her panicked eyes. "DeAndre." Thank God, she gasped, reaching out to grab his tailored suit jacket. "Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them to let my parents go. We need to leave. We need to go home to the kids right now." DeAndre smoothly sidestepped her grasping hands. He unzipped the leather folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with the official seal of the family court. He slapped the papers down onto the table right on top of her spilled champagne. "You do not have a home anymore, Audrey," DeAndre said, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable clarity. "And you are not going anywhere near my children." Audrey stared at the documents, her hands shaking violently. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice barely a whisper. "Those are emergency full custody orders," DeAndre stated coldly. "Signed by a judge 2 hours ago. You are officially deemed an unfit parent due to severe financial instability, compulsive gambling, and documented domestic hostility. Right underneath that order are your divorce papers. I am taking the kids, I am taking the house, and I am leaving you with the mountain of debt you built all by yourself. You are served." The finality of his words struck her with the force of a physical blow. Audrey let out a guttural, agonizing scream. She dropped to the floor, her scarlet silk dress pooling around her as she clawed at the legal papers. She wailed, begging DeAndre to reconsider, begging anyone in the room to help her. But the wealthy guests just stared in disgust. The man she had been trying to seduce earlier had already left the building. She was completely isolated, surrounded only by the shattered remnants of her own toxic entitlement. I stood on the balcony watching the flashing police lights cast harsh shadows over the ruined gala. Richard and Patricia were shoved into the back of separate federal vehicles. Audrey was left sobbing on the floor of a country club she could no longer afford to enter. The legal snare had functioned with absolute perfection. I turned away from the glass linking my arm through Leo's. The execution was complete. It was time to walk away and build a life entirely free from the wreckage we had just left behind. 6 months passed with the relentless, unyielding speed of a gavel striking solid wood. The legal system, when properly armed with bulletproof forensic data, operates with terrifying efficiency. We need a fast-paced montage here to convey the absolute finality of their destruction. Rapid cuts of official federal court stamps hitting thick stacks of indictment papers. The sterile fluorescent lighting of a courthouse hallway replacing the soft amber glow of their beloved country club. My father stood before a federal judge in a rumpled, oversized orange jumpsuit. There were no high-priced lawyers left to save him. The Internal Revenue Service had completely frozen his remaining assets, leaving him to rely on a heavily overworked public defender. Richard was sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. The camera captures the exact moment the judge handed down the sentence. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant patriarch permanently reduced to an inmate number. He traded his expansive commercial real estate portfolio for an 8x10 concrete cell. Patricia did not fare much better. She attempted to play the victim, sobbing on the witness stand and claiming Richard had forced her to sign the fraudulent documents. The federal prosecutor immediately played the dashcam audio of her laughing, while my face bled. The judge was entirely unmoved. Patricia received a 5-year federal sentence. The montage shows her being escorted out of the courtroom, completely stripped of her designer gowns and diamond necklaces. The society wives she had spent decades trying to impress did not even attend the trial. They had already erased her contact information from their phones. With the perpetrators officially incarcerated, my own financial resurrection was swift and absolute. The camera cuts to crisp, clean computer screens. The major credit bureaus formally expunged the fraudulent $500,000 line of credit from my record. I watched my credit score instantly rebound to its original flawless standing. My identity was officially and legally reclaimed. I had surgically excised the parasite from my financial existence. But the most visceral reality check belonged to Audrey. Without my parents secretly funneling stolen money to cover her massive gambling debts, she was thrown directly into the brutal machinery of federal bankruptcy court. The montage shifts to the harsh, unforgiving realities of modern societal consequences. Audrey lost the sprawling suburban house. She lost her luxury vehicles. DeAndre secured absolute full custody of their children, ensuring they would grow up in a stable, loving environment far away from her toxic influence. The final visual of my sister is a stark, unromantic shot of a neon sign buzzing over a 24-hour diner. Audrey, the former golden child who believed she was meant for European business trips and private jets, now worked the graveyard shift. She spent her nights wiping down greasy tables and serving black coffee to truck drivers, desperately trying to scrape together enough minimum wage tips to satisfy her court-ordered financial restitution. While Audrey served her sentence in the purgatory of minimum wage retail, the rest of us finally began to truly live. DeAndre completely transformed his reality. Freed from the relentless draining chaos of his marriage, he launched his own highly successful logistics company. He bought a beautiful, welcoming home with a massive backyard where his children could finally grow up surrounded by stability, unconditional love, and profound peace. They were safe and they were happy. As for Leo and me, we did not book a grand country club ballroom for our wedding. We did not hire ice sculptors or order thousands of imported orchids to impress strangers. We rented a small, secluded beach house on a quiet, sunlit coastline. We stood barefoot in the white sand listening to the gentle, rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves. There were only 20 guests in attendance. DeAndre stood right by Leo's side as his best man with his children running happily along the shoreline. Every single person standing on that beach was someone who had proven their loyalty, someone who valued us for exactly who we were. We exchanged our vows under a clear blue sky, completely untouched by the toxic shadow of the people who had tried to break us. It was not a social performance. It was a genuine, unshakable commitment. The visual direction shifts one final time. We return to the absolute static framing from the very beginning of the story. I am sitting in my warmly lit living room, comfortable and entirely secure. The camera rests in a fixed, intimate position. I lift my simple ceramic coffee cup and take a slow, peaceful sip. The harsh, jagged laceration that once defined my right cheekbone has faded into a barely visible thin white line. It is no longer a glaring injury. It is simply a quiet part of my history. I set the coffee cup down on the table and look directly into the lens. Society constantly feeds us this dangerous narrative that we must always forgive our parents, that we have to sacrifice our own mental and financial well-being simply because we share the same DNA. But blood does not grant anyone a license for abuse. Giving birth to someone does not entitle you to use their identity as a financial shield, and sharing a last name does not mean you have to set yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. I learned the hard way that family is not defined by biological obligations or fake holiday dinners. True family are the people who will physically shield you from the brick, not the ones who pick it up and throw it at you. If you have ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut off toxic relatives to save your own life, I want to hear from you. Share your story of breaking generational curses in the comments below. Let your survival be the proof someone else needs to finally walk away. Thank you for watching. The most profound lesson embedded in Clara's journey is that we possess the ultimate power to reframe our own narrative. For years, she was forced into a distorted picture viewed through the harsh, hypercritical lens of a toxic family that demanded her subjugation. They tried to keep her out of focus, minimizing her worth to highlight a false, fabricated golden child. But the defining turning point arrives when she stops accepting their chaotic direction and chooses to take control of the camera herself. Blood does not dictate loyalty, and sharing a last name does not obligate you to endure systematic abuse. True family is not an unyielding genetic institution. It is a conscious, continuous choice made by those who actively protect your peace and celebrate your authentic self. When we finally step away from the chaotic, blurred motion of generational trauma, we can clearly see the intricate details of our own resilience. Sometimes survival requires applying a macro lens to our reality, scrutinizing the stark, undeniable truths of who is actually standing by our side when the world shatters. Once that toxic influence is meticulously cut from the frame, we are left with something beautifully simple. We can finally pull back to a steady, quiet, static framing of our own lives. There is a profound, healing, emotional intimacy in simply sitting in a warmly lit living room, holding a coffee cup beside a cherished photo frame, entirely secure in the knowledge that the people surrounding us are there by choice, not by obligation. True peace is found when we become the sole directors of our boundaries. Take control of your own narrative today by unapologetically cutting out the toxic characters who no longer deserve a role in your life story.